What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Beautiful Division podcast. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my good friend, Chris Deeley, sports writer and author of Forgotten Nations, The Incredible Stories of Football in the Shadows. How you doing today, Chris?
I'm not doing too bad. I think a little later here than it is for you, but yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, it's still bright and early out here on the West Coast. So we're here to talk about Chris's book. The book is about the CONIFA Football World Cup, or World Football Cup. Got to get that right, which is a tournament of not quite independent nations, teams, ethnic groups, kind of all of the above. The teams that are either not recognized by FIFA for being too small, not being official countries. There's a long list, and I actually want to talk to you about that, as well as what some of the criteria is for that. But we're here to talk about that book, the inspiration behind it, some of the stories that have come out of it, and then, of course, the current state of CONIFA and some of these smaller independent football teams. But before we get into the book, why are you such a big football fan? When did that start? When did that become such a big part of your life?
So it's kind of weird because neither of my parents are big football fans. My dad is nominally a Burnley supporter, but my grandmother is a big Carlisle fan, and her side of the family have always been, season ticket holders at Brunton Park, that kind of thing. So I got kind of press ganged into being a Carlisle fan from a reasonably young age. I've seen us lose multiple Johnson's Paint Trophy finals at big stadiums. Saw us win one as well. We beat Brentford, and it became a kind of a link to a part of the family that my grandmother aside I don't actually see that much, because Carlisle is a long way from London, where I've lived most of my adult life. I've moved a little bit more northern now, but it was like with so many people, it was a family thing that got me into it, and then it all just kind of spirals out of control from there.
It's still something that you guys, I'm sure it's a bond that keeps you guys connected, right? Being able to talk about Carlisle and the club and how it's doing and all that.
So my grandmother lives near London, and now that I live up north now, but every year I'll come down for at least one game in or near London that we'll go together, and like every year is like one of the Christmas presents I'll get her every year is tickets for both of us for a Carlisle game that we can both go to. It's our text chains this year have been a little bit depressing because that team is not good right now, but yeah,
it's the beauty of sports. It's a nice connective tissue, cross-generational, cross-racial, all kinds of stuff. So as far as the book goes, when you first sent me the copy, this was, I think, 6-7 years ago, maybe more than that. I was really intrigued by the concept because, of course, the concept of football as a political entity, I think that's the word I'm looking for. It's so much more than the product on the field. But as far as the stories that kind of inspired you to write this book, what was it specifically? Was it one specific thing, or was it kind of a collection of experiences as a sports writer that led you to this?
So I kind of became aware of CONIFA and what they were doing in a weirdly roundabout way. This would have been 2017, I think, maybe 2018. I was working for a website called 90 Min, where I worked for about a decade. One of the other writers there did a piece on a company called AMS, who did shirts for they did footwear, like full shirts but they supplied like weird, like kind of micronations and stuff. And I was like, these shirts rule. There's one, and I have it in the house somewhere. It's for a country in inverted commas called Barawa, who were the nominal hosts of the World Football Cup in 2018 in London. And it's this great kind of blue and green and red thing, and the sponsor across the front, just big text, just says Red Sea exotic fish. And I was like, I don't know what these guys are doing, but I need to know more about it. And then you start digging and you just fall down a rabbit hole. I had a chance meeting with a publisher who'd actually come to the office to talk about Brighton FC, and I was like, yeah, by the way, I kind of had this idea that I go and keep digging into this thing. They're going to be in London this summer, and it all just snowballed from there.
And
also, yeah. I will say, now that I've mentioned that the other writer at 90 Min, Andy Headspeeth, lovely guy, It did sort of steal the title of the book from him. Forgotten Nations, I believe, was the phrase he used in that piece that I thought was just too perfect.
No, it is perfect because that's exactly what they are. And I think something I definitely want to talk about is kind of the modern concept of what we call like the nation state versus an ethnic group or a region. I think about maybe, I don't know, the concept is maybe 150 years old of this nation state versus, you know, back in the day, you would say, I'm not from Egypt, I'm from Cairo, or I'm from Alexandria, or, if you go further east, you would talk about, oh, I'm from Damascus, I'm not from Syria. It's like, it's a very different thing. And I think when you mix the two ideas of this ethnic groups and regions with actual nations that are recognized by FIFA and whatnot, it can make for kind of an interesting, sometimes explosive result. So as far as the nations that are part of CONIFA, I know CONIFA is the status of it is a little hazy right now, but how does a country or a group or a team go from, trying to get recognized by FIFA perhaps to this independent, football association?
So I think the thing for a lot of these places is you have to be, I believe you have to be a UN recognized country to be part of FIFA, which for a lot of these places is just not on the cards. You've got, I mean, the Yorkshire were part of CONIFA for a while, possibly still are, which Yorkshire's never going to be a country. This is a place in England, but they explained to CONIFA that there's a recognizable identity kind of cooked into being from Yorkshire, and that was enough to get them on the ticket. But then there's places like Tuvalu and Kiribati, kind of Pacific Island nations, that are, in the largest inverted commas possible, real countries, but they aren't FIFA members, essentially because the islands are too small to comfortably have a stadium that meets FIFA standards, and as such, they're not allowed to play with the big kids, basically, which always seemed incredibly unfair to me, because you're a country, you're a people, but you're being punished for the realities of the place you're living in.
I think I watched, it was like a 10-15 minute documentary on Tuvalu and sports there. And I think the island itself, the main play area or main athletic area is also the runway for the airport.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they have to be quite careful about which times they play, because that runway is underwater about half the time.
Yeah. So, and I remember that their main source of revenue, or one of their main sources of revenue, is the fact that their country domain is .tv. So they were
Exactly.
selling, so they were selling domains to, I don't know, ABC or CBS or BBC or something like that. So instead of BBC.com, you would go to BBC.tv, and it was kind of a major revenue point for them, aside from some tourism, I'm sure. But it's such a small place. I think it's a mile wide in some places for the most part, something like that.
Not even that. In so that you've got, like I said, most of the country is not, because it's a kind of chain of islands. Most of the country is literally not wide enough to have the kind of stadium that FIFA won. It is that skinny sometimes. The actual surface area of this place is tiny, and unfortunately rapidly shrinking. Projections at the moment have Tuvalu essentially being in the sea within the next half century, which is, I mean, obviously just unbelievably tragic.
Yeah, there's a lot of places in the Pacific where climate change is not just a concept; it's a reality that's literally
Yeah,
rising every day. I
there
mean,
was,
no offense to these. Oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
a little while ago there was, and I mentioned this in the book. There was a hurricane 1,000 miles away, maybe 1,500 miles away, something like that. But just the storm swell from that hurricane destroyed about 40-50% of the dwellings on Tuvalu. Most of the country is no more than about 4 or 5 meters above sea level, I think, and it's it's not for the faint-hearted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure they're a resilient people as a result. Yeah, I mean, no offense to these smaller countries that don't quite meet the criteria for FIFA because of logistical issues, but what I found more interesting was the ethnic groups or regions that are kind of asserting their own identity through these football teams that, of course, are not a UN recognized entity, so they won't be part of FIFA, things like that. Can you tell us about some of those that are featured in the book and maybe highlight a couple of them that really stood out to you?
So one that's always stood out to me is the Chagos Islands, which the UK, I hesitate to say colonized, because what essentially happened was we went to the islands, deported literally everyone who lived there, either to Mauritius or to London mostly, and turned it into, it's now a US naval base because it was in a kind of strategically useful place. And yeah, we were just like, no, we want this land now, so you can't have it. It was given, I think, by the British government to the US in exchange mostly for nuclear favours at the time. There's on record correspondence saying from someone in the British government saying, well, if this is a direct quote, if some Man Fridays, lose their homes, what does that really matter to us? And
when was this? When was this?
This was, I believe, in the 1970s, significantly later than you'd think or hope.
Yeah, I was going to say.
The fact it was around that time has actually become relevant because it was a 50-year lease to the US that's recently kind of come up. And obviously, there's Chagosian people still alive now who remember living on the islands. So the movement's been incredibly strong to bring some sort of justice to that. There's some people in the British Parliament who are trying very hard. There was a very recent ruling in the last month or so that some people will sort of be allowed back, but with an awful lot of asterisks on that. But the resilience of the people and the fact that there's still a recognisable Chagosian community has always really, really resonated with me. I think there's something incredibly inspiring about that.
Mm-hmm.
And your sense of, I know, kind of, obviously for a very good reason, there's a lot of problems with nationalism, especially at the moment. But I think keeping your sense of identity alive as a people and your culture alive as a people is kind of, it's nationalism's a two-sided coin, and that's the good side. There's also Artsakh, which I would love to have covered in the book. Unfortunately, I didn't go there until 3 days before the book came out. I travelled to Artsakh for the 2019 CONIFA Euros, which was probably the most insane week of my life. Within 12 hours of arriving in the country, which I'd had to fly to Ukraine and then fly to Armenia and then find someone to drive me 6 hours in the middle of the night over the mountains because you can't legally enter Artsakh.
So this is an area, I had to look this up when I read it in the Mundial article. It's recognized as part of Armenia or Azerbaijan right now.
It's recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but historically it's been Armenian populated. It's essentially, it is its own country. Or certainly when I went there, essentially it was its own country. Phenomenal, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Within 12 hours, I was in intensive care in one of the hospitals because the Armenian language turns out is really hard to read, and I inadvertently ate something with nuts in it. You don't have phone service there because no one will service the area because it's technically an illegal country or something. So I couldn't Google Translate anything in the hospital. If you've ever been in intensive care in a hospital, unable to communicate at all with any of the people who are treating you, I don't recommend it. Although there was there's a moment that really sticks in my mind. It was I was almost leaving. They were fantastic. But the doctor wanted to give me one more injection. He was like, I want to stick this needle in your backside. And obviously he didn't really have the words for that. So what he did was just kind of mime pulling his trousers down. And it's like, this is either going to go very well for me or very badly indeed. But Artsakh, like I say, incredible place, incredible people. And unfortunately, Azerbaijan began badly blockading the region about a year after I was there. Now, 5 years later, it's essentially been entirely ethnically cleansed of all Armenian people. and violently so. Someone recently who was there at the time described the 2019 Euros as kind of a lot of the people there kind of feel in hindsight that it was kind of a big last hurrah for the region as an entity, and for them as a people who lived there, which I think in some ways it's great that happened, but like it's just a tragic thing. I think there's the tens of thousands of people displaced and several killed, and it's the more people talk about Artsakh, I think the better.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it's something I've never heard of. I know that area is rife with conflict. I think it's easy to hand wave and say, oh, that's just how it is over there in that area of the region of the world, which I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's some arbitrarily drawn lines on a map that have decided that, these people are going to be part of this country and things like that. And one of the things that I really thought about while reading the book is how violent of a reaction there can be to some of these teams just for existing, just for wanting to assert some sort of, not even a national identity, but just a cultural or ethnic identity. Whether it was Kurdistan, I think there was the team of, like, I think it was ethnic Hungarian people in a region of Ukraine that were there.
The Italian team, yeah, who got incredible blowback after they won the World Football Cup in 2018, to the point that international authorities were involved.
Yeah, I mean, and I have my own thoughts on, I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious to hear why you think it's such an explosive issue in some of these places. I mean, it's not like there are some of them are, I'm sure, agitating for independence, but just the expression of a cultural ethnic identity, why does that elicit such a negative reaction from some of these countries?
I think it depends where they are. So there were countries in Ukraine, a few teams based in Ukraine or coming out of Ukraine at a time when Ukraine was incredibly sensitive to separatist ideology, should we say, because they were incredibly paranoid about Russia trying to take their territory, which, let's be fair, Russia wanted to take their territory.
Realistic,
we've all seen that. But the way it kind of manifested was a paranoia about anything that wasn't, we are Ukrainians, we love Ukraine. And I think what you see in other places is a smaller reflection of that. You've got Matabeleland in Zimbabwe, for example, which again, a relatively on a broad and global scale, a relatively new country, and one artificially created by Great Britain and Cecil Rhodes in particular. So when they say we're actually kind of our own thing, because we were here first.
Yeah.
Now
yeah.
in Ukraine, there's reasons for the overreaction. In Zimbabwe, in Matabeleland, those reasons are different, and the reasons are, I would say, more obviously wrong. Zimbabwe as a kind of colonial state has been horrendously mismanaged for most of its history, with varying levels of infamy. I mean, Robert Mugabe in particular was profoundly against Matabele, not just Matabele independence, but Matabele culture and Matabele people. A lot of the cruelest work that him and his death squads did in Zimbabwe were against Matabele people. For the book, I spoke to a former professor of mine at university who lost more or less his entire family in those purges, which was an hour and a half that I don't think I'll ever forget as long as I live. But yeah, there's different reasons for different reactions. Broadly, authorities want status quo. A country doesn't like an ethnic group seeing themselves as separate or perceiving themselves as separate, even when, a lot of the time, like with the Chagosian people in London, this is just, this is just people who are like, yeah, yeah, sure, we live in Croydon or whatever, but we have a past, we have a history, and we want to remember that.
Yeah, I think it's as an American, it's different for us because we're very big on the hyphenated identity. The
Yes.
even African American, which I don't really agree with as a term, but me, I'm an Arab American, even though I was born and raised in this country. I'm first generation, but I was born and raised here. I don't know anywhere else. Some people are Mexican Americans, Latin, whatever it is. So that's a very normal thing here. Even Muslim American, they'll say that. They don't say Christian American, but
The entire state of Boston is sorry, the entire state of New England is split between Italian Americans and Irish Americans.
yeah, exactly. And it's been hundreds of years since,
Yeah.
someone's great great grandfather came, on a boat to Ellis Island or something, but they'll still say I'm Italian American. But I remember specifically after France won the World Cup, it was a big deal because here in America we're like, oh yeah, Mbappe's from Algeria and I think Senegal, and such and such players from this African country, this former colony of France, and it was like, yeah, that's something that we celebrated. When I think it was Trevor Noah that was insisting on pointing some of these things out, there was a really violent reaction in France from these quote unquote African French people that were saying like, no, we're French.
Yeah.
We're not any of these other things, because that hyphenated quote unquote hyphenated identity is weaponized against them. Say you're not really French, you're from Senegal or Mozambique or
Yeah, I mean,
whatever it is. So
you see that as recently as this summer with Enzo Fernandez at the Copa America, and that squad singing, yeah, essentially saying the exact same thing. These French people aren't really French because they have a background from elsewhere.
exactly, and a lot of these places, it's interesting because they really want it both ways, where they're happy to take some of these people in and celebrate them as national sporting heroes, but when it comes time to assert some other identity, it becomes an issue, right? I mean, Benzema, I know he's Kareem Benzema, he's not on the national team for different reasons, but I think it was him that said, when I score, I'm French, when I don't, I'm Algerian. And I know Mesut Ozil, same thing with his Turkish identity in the German national team. So it's this whole thing is so fascinating to me, and that's one of the reasons I really loved your book, was just the assertion of some kind of national or ethnic identity through sports. And I always laugh at people that say, just stick to sports. Sports is not political. That's my escape from politics. And it's like, it's anything but. It's the most political thing out there besides politics. So I wanted to ask about some of these teams and the logistics behind it, because I found that fascinating as well. So a team like, to the Chagos Islands or Cascadia or some of these other places, maybe some of the smaller ones as well. How are they funded? Where is this money coming from to supply the players and all that?
So there is some sponsorship involved. Certainly in London 2018, there was some sponsorship involved. Now I believe CONIFA raised the money to kind of house everyone in London. They had a reasonably large sponsorship from a betting company, but a lot of it is self-funded donations and also crowdfunded. Matabeleland, to go back to them, had a crowdfunding system for basically getting them to the 2018 London, to the point of that they basically raised enough money to do it properly within the last few days. Like somewhat when they had to get, they were getting a 6-hour bus to the airport or something, and someone sent them enough money for them to all stop and get KFC on the way, because otherwise they probably would have been absolutely starving until they got to the airport, because they just didn't have the money, wasn't there in that venture. And they had really cool designed, their kits were very cool. They had a home and away kit, and they were fantastic, and they sold those online again to help fund the venture. And yeah, so it's helpful if you can get some sponsorship, or some of them are kind of government. So the tournament in Artsakh in 2019. Now that tournament was broadly government funded, which obviously keeps everything ticking over. But when it comes to your kind of your ethnic groups in other countries, your Capitalia or your Matabeleland or whatever, you've got to get creative, which a lot of them do very well. But it is a challenge, and it's all it's all very much a labour of love for pretty much everyone involved.
And were there any other stories that you had to cut out from the book that you would wish you were able to keep in there?
Like I said, there was the. I wish there had been a chapter on Artsakh in the book so much, because not just because I went there and the place absolutely astounded me, but I think they've got one of the most fascinating stories. I mean, the Armenian people historically have had to deal with ethnic cleansing and their identities being suppressed, and it is probably one of my 2 or 3 biggest regrets about the whole process of writing and publishing the book, that I went there slightly too late. Fun
I
story
mean,
that
it sounds like there's enough there for another book. Maybe not quite a sequel, but a different story to be told. Your memoirs traveling there.
there absolutely was. That was, as I say, the most bonkers week of my life. A government press pass in Artsakh that week basically gave you the right, because you got soldiers roaming the streets and it's everything is armed security, and then you flash your press pass at them and they're like, yeah, do what you want. The first game of the opening ceremony had been the previous night in the National Stadium, and they hadn't quite finished taking down the stage from the opening ceremony yet. So behind one of the goals, there's a kind of scaffolding and kind of a big stage, and the match is going on. It's like 35 minutes in or something, and I'm just like, well, I already know I can walk past the security and get onto the running track or whatever. I wonder if I can get up on the stage and take a picture from, just take a big panorama of the whole thing. And there was a armed soldier there, obviously, at the kind of staircase, and I just kind of waved the press pass, and he was like, "Yeah, up you go." I looked around about 30 seconds later, and I saw 3 soldiers having an argument about whether I should be allowed up there or not. And I think the gist of it basically was, we've been told this country is selling itself right now. This region is selling itself right now. This is the world's press. If he wants to go up there, he can go up there. It was absolutely bananas.
Yeah, and I think you were about to share a story about the one that didn't quite make the cut from the World Cup in London. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
Yeah,
please.
so it wasn't actually from London. It was prior to London. The northern Italian team, Padania, a region that the team have always insisted is separate from the fact that the extreme far right Lega Nord party have kind of insisted, oh yeah, this is northern Italy, it's a thing, this is the best place because it's not full of immigrants like the south. And that's broadly where the idea of Padania was popularised. The team have always insisted they're separate. But I was told from a member of the executive committee at CONIFA, who I won't name, that the reason Mario Balotelli's brother no longer played for that team was because the coach racially abused him during a game. His own coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, that's an incredible story to get in there. I need to make sure this is true. So I flew to Milan because Enoch, Mario's brother, was playing for a Serie D side at the time. So the closest you can get to amateur football that's sort of organised.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of got a train about 30 minutes south and just kind of went to the stadium like, hey, is he around? The stadium was completely empty except for the owner's wife and her dog, which hated me. And it turned out Enoch was serving I think it was something like a 7-game ban for shoving a referee over during a game. So they were like, yeah, I'm not sure if he's coming to training today because he's got, he's serving this ban. So he's like, can I really be bothered? So it ended up the owner's wife got the coach to ring him on my behalf and was like, can you come in? You're not coming in today. Come in tomorrow. So he came in the next day for training, arrived 45 minutes late, looked at me and went, I'm so sorry, I can't sit down. I have to train, otherwise he's going to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like kicking around for like an hour and a half, just kind of watching training, realizing all the time, like, I've got to rebook my flight, all of this. And it's difficult to say whether this is fortunate or unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the book. It's fortunate for, the facts of the matter. But he was like, no, I was never racially abused by the coach. I believe the direct quote was, you would have known if I was, because I would have killed him. And then he drives me back to the train station and FaceTimes Mario at the time. It would have been like 5 p.m. or something. And Mario's just like shirtless in bed. He's like, "Oh, what's going on?" He's like, "This English journalist came to interview me. Say hi."
He's probably in Turkey at this point, playing in Turkey.
I think this would have been early 2019. So I think he might have been in Italy at that point, actually. I think they might both have been in Italy. Yeah, just bonkers. I guess that's the the weird upside of doing your journalism properly is that flying to Italy and kind of doorstepping someone to check this story ended up almost being a better story than if it was just true.
Yeah, I remember that team specifically was kind of almost the villains of the book, if there was going to be a villain, because of the ties to the far right. And I think that's, like you said, it's the nationalism or this expression of identity can be that it's that double-sided coin of
Cuts both
this
ways.
is this is not quite a positive thing that they're trying to express here. That like we're different because we're better. I mean, you kind of lead into that white supremacy aspect of things. So it's always a little problematic. But so I did want to talk about the article that you have in Mundial about the current status of CONIFA. Can you tell us what's going on with that? I know the pandemic has really affected a lot of things. It's had a really negative impact, of course, on the organization and some of these teams. But what is the current status of this organization?
The current status is that it still exists, all nominally active. Regional chapters are, I think, having more success organising small tournaments than the kind of global factor of it. There hasn't been a tournament with more than 3 teams in it since the 2019 Euros that I went to, where there were, I think, a dozen, or it was around that number. A couple of late pullouts just because of logistics, but it's CONIFA that happens. So yeah, there hasn't been more than a 3-team tournament in the last 5 years. There's been some confusion over when the next World Football Cup is getting held and where it's going to be. It was meant to be this summer in Kurdistan, then it was meant to be next summer in Kurdistan. Now it is not in Kurdistan, and again, kind of up in the air. It's an absolute cluster, whatever, in terms of seeing the big picture. I think a lot of it's reached the point that CONIFA is top down. I think badly organised enough that kind of alternatives have started to spring up, and because CONIFA don't have that monopoly anymore of being the one. You organise a tournament like 2018 in London, and then 2019 in Artsakh and Abkhazia before that. You are de facto the place for non-FIFA international football. When you stop being able to do that, these are largely volunteer organisations. These are other people are going to be like, okay, you don't seem to be up to the task anymore. I'm going to set up an alternative and actually get people playing, which unfortunately hasn't necessarily come to fruition so far. But I did have a good chat with Ruby, who is the president of CONIFA Asia and Oceania. And while I don't have a lot of faith in the broad strokes of CONIFA at the moment, I have a lot of faith in her making that region work in terms of CONIFA, in terms of organising tournaments, because as far as I can tell, she's more or less a force of nature, and also one of the few people who comes recommended by people who have left the organisation, which at this point I think is relatively rare. So regionally, there's some positives. Globally, I feel that the organisation is in real risk of just dying a slow death. They barely update their website. No one's really clear on what's going on. There'll be an announcement about something and then just radio silence for months. I was putting in media requests on their into their contacts on the website and just getting absolutely nothing back. It's it's not an organization in good health, which is a genuine shame, because what they did and what they stand for, are incredibly powerful things. But they, as is the way with so many volunteer organizations, you lose one or two key people, or one or two people fall out, and everything kind of domino effects.
Yeah. Maybe this is more of a larger question, but I think we're semi-aligned politically for the most part. I think we can agree there's been a rise or a rebirth of a lot of far-right ideology in a lot of places, in America and in Europe, etc. I mean, is there still a space for teams like this to exist, for tournaments like this to exist in this world where we're becoming more and more polarized every day?
I think now more than ever. I think the need to express your identity in a positive way is probably at an all-time high right now. And it's difficult, obviously. The environment in the world, certainly in kind of Mid and Eastern Europe, where a lot of these teams come from, that does make it very difficult. But in terms of, what's all saying, hey, this is us. We're not saying, we're not standing up and saying this is us, and also we need everything to be catered to us. We're just saying, hey, we've got a fascinating history and a sense of community, and we want to celebrate that. And that, I think, now is needed more than ever. But yeah, it's about getting that organised and finding the right people to lead that, which is a challenge.
Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for sending me the book. It opened my eyes to a lot of new things, a lot of new places, a lot of new peoples. So where can people find the book, and where can people read some more of your excellent writing?
So people can find the book on, it's probably easiest to get it from Amazon. Just search Forgotten Nations, Chris Deeley. Job's a good one. A lot of people used to say, hey, if I buy it like from one of the other bookshops, do you get more or less money from that? Doesn't matter. You can follow me on Twitter at that Chris1209, Blue Sky at just Chris Deeley. And at the moment, you can find most of my writing on gpfans.com, the US editor there. So I'll be writing about F1, IndyCar, and NASCAR.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll make sure to include a link to the Amazon link and links to your social in the description. Again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you, man. Appreciate it.
All right, great.